Hi everyone, welcome to another Matchday AMA with me, your host, Sean Mullen. This time I was joined by Matthew Crist of the Life with Brian podcast, something he set up a few years ago with the former Manchester United, Celtic and Scotland striker Brian McClair. They launched this and it's really taken off. It's been in the top 10 for listening charts in countries all over the world, and they've had some really interesting guests. So without any further ado, let's hear what he had to say about it. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Sean. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a long time since I heard your dulcet tone.
Oh wow, what a welcome! No, it's very nice to speak to you again. It has been a very long time. I think what is it, 3-4 years maybe?
Yeah. It must have been 2019, I think, wasn't it? Just we all went our separate ways just before the whole world went our separate ways.
We did, yeah. We timed that well.
Yeah.
So there's a few people in at the moment. We'll just give some other people some more time to come in. But for the people who are here now, I guess Matthew, who's just been speaking then, he and I used to work together at another company, and he's gone on to do very big and exciting things since then, which we'll be talking about today. Thank you very much again for joining us, Matthew. I think I was looking at some of the guests you had on the podcast, and I think we have one mutual guest. Graham Hunter has been on this in the past.
Oh, good old Graham. Yeah, he joined us from his toilet in Spain.
Oh wow.
He was looking for a room that had good acoustics, and I think he's got an apartment in some busy Spanish city, and he actually joined us from his toilet in Spain, and it sounded exactly like it was someone talking in a toilet. It's all echoey and
yeah. I mean, that's commitment. That really is. I don't know anyone who's as dedicated as that. But yeah, no, he was very interesting to speak to. He was telling us about the time he saw Leo Messi driving around in a Formula One car and looking very green afterwards. He's got some amazing stories. Yeah,
he has. He didn't tell us that one, but
he's probably got so many. He's just how does he remember them all? Okay, right. So we're on the hour now, so we'll get started, and hopefully some other people might join as we go along. Hello everyone, welcome to another Matchday AMA, Ask Me Anything, with myself, Sean, and I'm joined today by Matthew Crist. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Sean. Lovely to speak to you, and hello everyone that's listening.
Yes, and Matthew and I, as I have just mentioned there, we used to work together at a company, and since then, Matthew, after leaving, well, I think you did it a bit at the company as well, worked with Brian McClair, who used to play for Manchester United, to create a podcast, the Life with Brian podcast, which has just gotten huge. It's number one in sports podcasts in loads of countries all over the world. It's crazy how much it's taken off. It's been really interesting to see it. Just before we start talking, I should mention, Joanne has very kindly reminded me that if anyone wants to share a question, you just hit the little tweet icon for the space, and you'll be able to send us your question to ask Matthew. But let's get into it. So, Matthew, this amazing podcast you've got with Brian McClair, let's go back to the beginning. How did it all get started? Where did it all begin for you two?
Well, before I start, I will just remind you that he also played for Celtic as well. Because
yes, of course.
We often, often we get Celtic fan, and Celtic are arguably as big a club as United around the world.
Yes.
And
apologies to any Celtic.
So that's the housekeeping done.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we used to work together, and Brian was one of our ambassadors, wasn't he? Along with other great sports stars, and Brian was great, is great value, and was when we worked with him, and he always had stories to tell and interesting anecdotes. And I used to ghost his column. We did a weekly column, was it monthly? I think it was. I can't remember, but I used to ghost it for that organisation. And when we all left that organisation, I kept that Chocky's Diary column going, and we did it for a number of publications because it was so popular. When he was at United, he used to do Chocky's Diary for the Manchester United magazine, and it was huge. And people still talk about it now, 25 years on, because he used to give this little sort of behind the scenes look at what it's like at the club, and he was a bit mischievous, and he would leak little nuggets about Alex Ferguson and play, and it would always make the papers. So I had to ghost this. I didn't have to, but I ghosted this column. And what I used to do is I'd just ring him up, and then I'd put the phone on record, and I'd just chat to him for about an hour, and say to him, what have you been up to and whatever. And then it was my job to pretend to be him and sort of write it up as he would say it. I mean, he's quite capable of doing that himself, I'm sure. But when I used to listen back to the recordings that we did, I used to think, this is great stuff, because you've got a guy here who's played for United and Celtic and Scotland, and he knows all these famous people, and he'd be chatting away, and I'd be listening back to the recording, and I thought, this is like a podcast in itself. So it was playing on my mind for a while, because obviously everyone and their dog's got a podcast now, but this was a few years ago, and so I said to him, look, would you be interested in doing a podcast? And I didn't think much of it, because I thought Brian's quite quiet, even though he's quite a lively guy, he can be quite private. And I said, would you think about doing it as a podcast? He said, oh yeah, I'd love to. Because Brian's fascinated with any kind of like technical innovations and stuff. He's always, when he was a player, he always had the latest CD machine or the latest Sega Mega Drive or whatever it was in the 90s. And so he said, yeah, let's do it as a podcast. So I went away and I thought, okay, well, how can we do it? So it's not just me and him chatting about football and then me taking notes, because I thought that would be pretty boring after a couple of weeks. So I thought, well, I'd love to do it as a sort of a chat show format. So, because obviously, again, if it's just me and Brian chatting, after a while, people are going to get pretty sick of us. So I thought what would be great would be to try and find a guest each episode and do it as like a round table pub chat. I don't know. My inspiration was probably things like TFI Friday and those kind of almost all those American chat shows, where they get the guests on and they all sit there on a couch and chat. And so I had that in the back of my mind. So I approached Mark Godfrey, who's our now producer and co-host, who worked on some brilliant podcasts, and I knew he was really good at this kind of stuff. So I said, look, do you fancy doing it? And this is the sort of thing that I fancy doing. We get a guest and we do a little chat and everything, as I've just said to you. And he said, yeah, I'd love to. So we put it to Brian and we said, look, go through your little black book, because I know you've got loads of media or celebrity contacts, so you can get on. And that's what we did. And I mean, it just so happened for us, it occurred in that third lockdown, I think, when that winter where everyone went back in. So essentially we were doing what everyone was doing, sitting around chatting on Zoom. Yeah. But we were lucky enough to get just some interesting guests. And I think we got Pat Nevin first, and then, like you say, we got Henry Winter and Clive Tills, and it's just snowballed from there. So it was basically, I just wanted to have this, like we did in the old days, Sean. Sit around a table with a pint, and but each week or each episode we'd have someone completely different, and it wasn't always. I didn't always want it to be football. I thought that would be quite short lived, and so now we've just evolved to pretty much whoever wants to come on or whoever we can get on. So it's certainly not a football podcast. It's pretty much anything but, I think.
Yeah, you've had a very sort of eclectic mix of guests. Like you said, you mentioned the footballers, but I think in your latest episode you've got Nick Robinson, formerly of the BBC, and you had Michelle Roux on, the chef, as well.
Yeah.
Are these people Brian knows, or are these people? How are you sourcing these people?
Yeah, well, it's luckily really, because it's snowballed. I mean, when we first started, like so, we tapped up Pat Nevin because he's good mates with Brian, and Graham Hunter and John Colquhoun, who Brian played with at Hearts, and we got some general interest going, and then me and Mark each week would say, right, who are we going to get next? I think then we got Manny from the Stone Roses, who's a good mate of Brian's as well. So that's when we first started tapping into this non-football world, and we thought this is great, because it is great to talk to people that obviously they like football and they're football fans. They don't have to be, but then we were chatting to Manny about all kinds of various misdemeanors, as you would imagine. And so we thought this would be great to just get some people on that are just from any walk of life, sort of well-known people from any walk of life. So then we got Rowetta from the Happy Mondays, who was brilliant value. And then we went down the route of Terry Christian and what have you. So it grew and grew and grew. And then because we got a bit of a following, we just started trying our luck. The old days of almost blagging it. we contacted Michelle. We knew Michelle Roux was a United fan, and so we contacted his PA, and she came back and said, "It sounds interesting. Can I tell Michelle what it is?" And we said, "Well, basically, it's an hour and a half. We're sitting around chatting about anything and everything with an ex-Man United player, and anything goes." And she came back and said, "I've spoken to him about it, and he'd love to come on. Can we go do it next week?" And we were like, "Whoa, okay." Wow. And then, so that was big. And then, of course, on the back of that, then we got Brian O'Driscoll, who, arguably one of Ireland's probably greatest rugby players and probably one of Ireland's most famous sports personalities. And then on the back of that, I think when you start getting a bit of a name for yourself, people start going, "Well, if it's good enough for Michelle Roux, then it's good enough for me," And then we tried Nick Robinson, because I knew he'd worked with Alex Ferguson a few years ago, and he was good value, and it changes it up a bit to have a former BBC News correspondent, now host of the Radio 4 Today programme, million followers on Twitter, interviewed prime ministers for the last 30 years. I mean, who wouldn't want a guest like that on their podcast? And he came on, and that came out this Monday, and he was absolutely brilliant. It's one of my favourite shows because, again, yes, it touches on football at the start, but then later on we start talking about how he told Boris Johnson to shut up, and how people were telling him on Twitter that they hoped he got run over by a bin lorry, and all this kind of stuff. So it's just good,
explosive.
Great. Yeah, it's just great guests that give good stories, and that's what we just want to keep doing, really.
And you mentioned there about how as you've grown, you've been at, this has been another way you can approach people. And I've been looking at your LinkedIn updates. I see them all the time, and it's amazing how much it's taken off. And it seems like
I'm glad somebody does, Sean. I'm glad someone looks at that.
No, honestly, I think it's amazing when you're saying it's the most listened to football sports podcast in Costa Rica and Bolivia, and then Ireland as well. Yeah. It's mad. And you're seeing the people you're ahead of, the official Liverpool podcast, ahead of the Overlap with Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher, ahead of the Guardian.
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that it would take off as much as it has?
I think no. I'd have to say no. I wouldn't. I didn't, because it's just something I'd never been involved in it before. It was quite experimental. If I did it again, if I did another podcast now, I think my expectations would probably be a bit more realistic. But no, we tried. It was very much an experiment. But saying that, I don't think I didn't realise how entertaining and what a good speaker Brian is. I mean, he's obviously got a huge following from United and Celtic, but he can hold a story. He's very inquisitive, and so all the parts are there for a really good show. And add in someone like Brian O'Driscoll. I mean, I bet at the end of this week we're not number one in Ireland when we've got Nick Robinson on, and that's not any slight on Nick Robinson at all. I think, but
his rugby career was not quite as good.
No. But saying that, we have always had a very big following in Ireland, and we did a live show in Ireland last year, and we had a couple hundred people turn up, and I think you can obviously connect that to Celtic and United, but I try not to go too much down the football route. I think like my mum listens to it, you'd expect her to, but I mean she hasn't got any interest in football at all, but she'll listen to it because she's interested in listening to people like Michelle Roux and Nick Robinson, or whoever we've got on, because they're just interesting people, and I think that's the trick. I just think it's a trick of get good guests on and having them join the fun and getting involved, and that. But I mean, that's Ireland. How, in terms of Costa Rica, Bolivia, South Korea, Brazil, I mean, all those countries you named, we've been in the sort of top 10. I mean, in Bolivia, Costa Rica, we were number one, which I just don't. Maybe their competition isn't very good. Maybe maybe we've got 10 listeners and they've got 8.
You've been too modest.
I'd love to see the breakdown, but no, I find it quite. I mean, it's a bit vain, I know, but whenever we do a show, I always love to look at and see who the hell. Bermuda. I think we were number 7 in Bermuda last week. So it's fascinating, but I'll take it. But like I say, maybe I'm being too modest, but.
You absolutely are. I'm convinced of it. And the other thing, so I saw there was because obviously you've had not just the success of the listenership, but the media coverage as well. I think the Daily Mail did a story about it, and I saw some other papers as well.
Yeah,
it's and I saw there was a quote in one of the newspaper articles where they mentioned being number one in Costa Rica to Brian McClair, and he said, "Yeah, it's just another another mad thing that's happened to me. What does he make of it all? Because I know you said like he's very, interested in technological developments, but I think for anyone, it must be quite a surreal experience for someone to say like, yeah, they're going mad for you in La Paz or wherever.
Yes. Well, maybe
Yeah.
maybe he's used to it. You know what he's like. He's a very
Mm,
modest guy. I mean, maybe
yeah.
when you play for Man United for 11 years, maybe you do get a bit more used to it. I think he's just baffled by it. I think
Mm,
I mean, especially the newspaper coverage. And since Christmas and now, we've had all kinds of requests from newspapers. The Daily Mail wanted to do a big feature. Brian was like, I don't want to talk to the Daily Mail.
yeah.
I get dog's abuse for that. So, but in fairness,
Mm,
they accepted it, and they did a really nice piece just from like all the stories from the guests we've told, we've had on. We've been in he did a piece with Jim White in the Telegraph. He did, we're in the Mirror, and and it's fascinating. As he said the other day, he just doesn't know where the fascination comes from,
mm.
but yeah, he's a modest guy. But I think he probably realizes that we must be doing something right. I think otherwise, we're certainly not paying the papers. There's
No, of
how
course.
social media works. Sometimes
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sometimes there are terrible accusations of people are paying papers to be in there, but we're certainly not doing that. They were knocking on our door recently.
I'm sure of it. I know you would never go into the murky underworld of that area of social media.
No, not at all.
Um, and in terms of Brian's involvement when it's sort of like a usual episode, how sort of like involved is it? Just sort of like a case that you sit down and kind of go with it, or do you need to say to him like, look, you need to read up on this person, Brian,
Well,
or what's the process
we'll
there?
be giving all the secrets away here. But what usually happens? What usually happens is we secure a guest, or we get wind of a guest coming on, and I always say to Brian, "How about so and so? How about anyway?" Oh yeah, great. So me and Mark, does all the hard work really, and myself, we'll go right. Let's get a script together. So we sit down, we do a script on a Google Doc and things that we can discuss, and just because you don't want to be I hate listening to things where it's not scripted and people go, there's a lot of umming and ahhing and it drifts. We don't stick to a script in terms of, it's not verbatim. It's just, if you've got some great guests on there like Michelle Roux and Brian O'Driscoll and Nick Robinson, there's things you want to ask them. So we just,
Yeah.
it's just there. But funnily enough, we've never involved Brian in these script meetings. And so what he does, he goes away and does his research, and then we all convene on the day of the record, and he'll go, oh yeah, I've got loads of stuff, and he'll spend about 2 days investigating, researching these people, and so we start the conversation, and we go, Brian, anything you want to bring to and he just goes off on one, and half the time it's all the things that we were going to talk about on our script. So as we're going through the show, you put a line through that, line through that, line through that. But in a way, I like that, because I don't. If it was all too scripted and we all sat around and we said, right, you come in here with this, you come in here, it just wouldn't work. It's like I said at the beginning, it has to be a natural, organic chat. And I think if you listen to it, some of the people that you wouldn't, I never thought I would be sitting around a table with a Michelin star chef or a host of Newsnight, or a Grand Slam winning rugby player, or whatever, but everyone that seems to come on seems to get involved. I mean, we do throw a few games in. I mean, we always try and surprise Brian with a few quizzes or games or what have you. There are things that we don't tell him about just to keep it natural, because otherwise it would be a bit too formulaic. But no, Brian certainly, and I think if you listen to the first few, the show's evolved now that we've got it down to a good feel and a good tempo, because we know what we're doing. The first few, we drifted on for ages and we were chatting too long, and we were, I think you get to a stage where you know what works and what doesn't work, and now we've got it down to a nice hour and a half of good chat, and then questions and this kind of thing. And I suppose practice makes perfect, or somewhat perfect. But Brian certainly does his work. Like I say, I said to him once, I said, do you want us to link you in with the script that we've got? And he said, no, I'll just do my stuff and you do your stuff. And like I say, it keeps us on our toes, because we're, you don't quite know what he's going to ask. But I like that, because it makes it, it can surprise us as much as it can the guests.
Yeah, I guess it's good to have that sort of spontaneity to react to.
Well, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't if me and you or a few of us were sitting around the pub table, we wouldn't expect to know or be given warning of what we were going to say. I mean, I know some people that you know exactly what they're going to say every time you see them, but it would make for a boring show, I think.
It would. A very boring and probably short-lived evening.
Yeah.
So I know, obviously, from working with you, that Brian's one of your childhood heroes as a Manchester United fan. So this must be like a dream come true for you to be working with one of your idols.
You say one of my childhood heroes. He was my childhood hero.
Okay, I didn't want to
and he
take that risk.
And he knows it. He knows it. I think you were working there the day when he came in the office, and we had to like make our pleasantries, and I was all embarrassed because I thought the story is I was asked at school when the first ever national lottery started in October '94, I think it was, 93. And someone said, if I won the lottery, I'd buy a speedboat, and if I won the lottery, I'd do this. And someone at school in the sixth form said, what would you do if you won the national lottery? I said, I'll buy Brian McClair. and they said,
just to hang out.
Yeah, just to hang out. And they're like, are you mad? I was like, no, I'd buy him, because I think I worked it out. He was like at the end of his contract, and he'd probably be worth about £3 million. And so I was like, yeah. And then obviously, I don't know if you were in the office that day, but they forced me to tell him the story. And
I have a vague memory.
Killed himself laughing. Yeah. And now he stays over at my flat, and we go out drinking and whatever. And he basically says, you saved yourself about £3 million there, haven't you?
That worked out well.
Yeah. So. And then, as a kid, I loved him. He was an iconic player when he came down. Ferguson's first signing in '87. Was it part of that, the old school team that then morphed into the team that went on and won the league and then the double and everything else? And he was that linchpin between the old and new. I just loved him as a character because he liked his music, his politics. He was quite an interesting guy, as he still is. And I had a whole wall in my bedroom dedicated to him. A whole wall. I mean, when they're boys of my age that probably had pictures of Sam Fox and Sarah Cracknell or whoever it was on there, my whole wall was dedicated to Brian McClair. And
in different clothing, to be fair.
Yeah, all kinds of, well, clothed to start. So when obviously we sort of realised we were going to be working together, it was odd. But the funny thing is now I can think there's like Brian the footballer who when I watch old clips I think, oh yeah, McClair, brilliant. And then there's Brian, there's the mate or the guy that I know now. Yeah. They don't often seem the same person. And sometimes I'll be sitting there chatting to him, and I'll be like, and he'll say something like, oh yeah, I remember that night we were in away at Newcastle, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I was there that night, yeah. And you think, oh yeah, you're the guy that there's like two different people. It's like, so it is weird now, but no, I'm not certain. They say never meet your heroes, but certainly not the case with Brian. I can't speak for many others, but no, it is surreal. But I quite like the fact that we're doing something we both enjoy. It's not. I don't think I have to put a gun to his head and force him to do this. So I certainly hope he wouldn't. I don't think he's the kind of guy that would do it if he didn't want to. So it's a win-win. But the weird thing is, if it wasn't Brian McClair, the footballer, I think I'd still like whoever that person is to be working on my podcast, because he just brings a lot to it. So it's like a double win, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that really comes across in the podcast. You can always sort of tell if someone's enjoying it as opposed to going through the motions.
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah.
And he's a naturally inquisitive guy. I think there's a hidden David Letterman in there that we're starting to unleash now, because let's say the first few episodes we waffled on a lot at the start, and then we did. But now, if you listen, he kind of takes the lead, which is perfect, because we wouldn't be getting these big guests on if it was me and just me and Mark Godfrey. Believe me, they're on because it's Brian McClair. So rightly so, he steals the show.
So who would you say, I know we've mentioned some of the people that you've had on so far, but who would you say have been I don't want to say like maybe the most memorable guests, but the most sort of memorable moments or standout moments that you've encountered so far during the podcast?
It's tough. Going every time. I mean, we had Nick Robinson on Monday, and that went out, and I always listen back 2 or 3 times just for continuity and check everything. And I messaged Mark, the co-host, saying, I think that's our best podcast ever, that. And he always says, yeah, but you'd always say that, which I do, because I think I think the more everyone you do, you sort of improve. But I loved the Nick Robinson one just because of the stories of, you got someone, like I said earlier, you got someone, you're talking to someone that's interviewed living prime ministers and have been there, when the shit's happened, he's been there with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, and he's been in 10 Downing Street. But then I loved. I mean, Dominic Diamond, and I was putting them together, and I don't know why. I think there's a bit of a trend, but Dominic Diamond and Terry Christian, I thought were brilliant, just because of their. I mean, showing my age a bit, but like I grew up watching them and listening to them on the radio. Terry Christian's obviously a big star in the 90s, hosting The Word. He's sort of making a bit of a comeback now, and Dominic Diamond, but they can talk, and anyone that can talk and has got a story to tell is just an absolute. Is gold dust for anyone hosting any kind of show, because you don't want to be there with any dead air. And believe me, if you've got Terry Christian and Dominic Diamond, I mean, if we'd ever got them together on the same show, or if we ever do that as a live show, I think we'd have to allocate about 4 hours of our time. But yeah, those two, great. I don't think there's a standout moment. I quite liked. We played a couple of games recently. We played one with Michelle Roux, like a true or false one, where we had to give him the name of we gave him a name, and it was either a restaurant in Glasgow or the name of a Scottish football ground.
Oh, nice!
And he got really.
How did he get on?
He did okay, because obviously some of those. I can't think of the top of my head what some of them were called, but some of those old Scottish football grounds do sound like trendy restaurants that you'd find in the West End of Glasgow, and he really loved that, and we were all having a good laugh about that. And I did think at the end of that, I never expected I'd ever be doing that, and the guests really get into it so far, and I think that's what makes it work. But I mean, it's so difficult to tell, because Clive Tilsey was a big one for me, because I grew up listening to him, all the big commentaries, all the big Champions League finals, the 99 final, the 05 final, and you got him. I'll tell you what about Clive was brilliant. Was we recorded with him one evening, and we did a good hour or so with him, and he told all these great stories. And then God help us, we listened back, and the mics weren't working, and it was like, oh no, what are we going to do? I was gutted, and so Brian messaged Clive and just said, sorry, we've had some technical problems. Is there any chance you could come on again? He said, yeah, let's do it Wednesday night. They always say it's better the second time around, and in fairness to Clive, he came on and he was just as entertaining. He gave he didn't repeat everything he said, but so that was special, and I'll be forever ever grateful for him for doing that, because he could have easily said no. But that's the power of McClair, you see.
Absolutely. Probably desperate to come back on.
As Manny said when we said thanks to him for the at the end of the show, he said, "Well, what McClair wants, McClair gets, man." And I think that says a lot about the people we get on here.
Nice one, yeah. Good to have that pulling power.
Yeah.
So you've obviously spoken to some really interesting people so far, but who hypothetically would be your dream podcast guest to get on?
Well, I mean, are we naming names here? Because I thought we were going to talk about this a bit later on, but
we can. So there is. I know what you're talking about. There's another question about this.
If we're talking about dream, I won't name names, but what I'll say is the dream podcast guest is someone that's massively famous, but well, that's obviously helps our hits. But no, someone that's got just a really good background and a good story to tell, and is very engaging and very entertaining. Like I say, I keep saying Brian O'Driscoll was brilliant. I knew nothing about the guy. I've never met him, and I was quite intimidated because I thought this guy is a big star, and he's still on ITV, he's still on Irish TV. He's a huge rugby legend, and he came on. We recorded about 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was, from the start, he was having a laugh. He was taking the mickey out of himself. He was laughing about Brian, and that, I think, is your dream guest. Someone that's prepared to really throw themselves into it. I mean, luckily we haven't had any nightmare guests. We were saying this to Nick Robinson on Monday, because he's got a podcast now called Political Thinking, where he gets sort of political figures on, but he doesn't necessarily grill them like he would if it was BBC or ITV. He just gets them on to have a chat. Like we do, in a way, and same with Matt Ford, the comedian, who was brilliant. And we said, "Is there anyone you wouldn't have?" And they both said no. Matt Ford's, let's say, quite of a centre left position, a big Tony Blair man. And we said, would you have Boris Johnson on? Would you have Donald Trump on? He was like, of course I would. You'd be stupid if you wouldn't. And I think that's the same with us. You don't necessarily have to agree with these people, but you can have a chat with them and have an interesting time with them. So I think that's your dream guest. Nightmare, we haven't had any yet. I suppose Nightmare would be someone that Brian didn't like, but he has given me a list. He's given me a list of a name of two people he said he wouldn't want to get on the show, or he said please don't ask, because he doesn't get on with them very well. So I obviously wouldn't do that because I think it would be a bit awkward.
Yeah, that's a bit.
But yeah, I mean, let's say someone like, I think Frankie Boyle would be brilliant, because he once said that Brian McClair broke his heart when he left Celtic to go to United. So I think someone like, he's got a bit of a football background. He's obviously a funny guy. He's got a lot to say. I mean, someone like that would be brilliant. Nightmare guest. Oh God, I don't know who's. A nightmare guest would probably be a current Premier League footballer, because they're not allowed to say anything, and they can't say anything.
I know exactly what you mean.
So I think that's being diplomatic, but I think if someone offered us up, I don't know. I don't want to pick on anyone particular, but Luke Shaw or someone like that, or Trent Alexander-Arnold. They're probably great guys. I'd probably say, look, can you come back in 10 years? Because at the minute you can't say anything that's entertaining, because you're going to get in trouble, or your club, you're going to have a media officer standing behind you telling you.
Cut that out.
So I think that's the nightmare guest, and that's why we don't. Well, not only that we don't go down that route, but they probably wouldn't come on anyway because they've never heard of us. But
well, not yet, but
no,
they're going all the time.
If we're still going when Luke Shaw's retired, I'll be happy.
Right, well, as you alluded to, let's name some names. Right, we have at Matchday, it's a digital football trading card game, and we've got like different rarities of cards. So the top three, you have the limited cards, and then beyond that you have rare, and then the rarest of all you have, currently the rarest of all you have legendary. There is also a unique category, but that's not yet been implemented. So to you, your top, but essentially you're naming your top three dream podcast guests in reverse order. So I have a limited, a rare, and a legendary guest.
Okay. I mean, you did give me forewarning for this,
I did.
And I stupidly forgot to have a look at it until about half an hour
this
ago.
is why it's good. It's spontaneous.
What's caught me out is the order. You see, there's 3 or 4 people that I would love to get on, and it's just in what order. I mean, see, I've gone number 3, Alex Ferguson. Right? I think he would be brilliant. I think he'd be fascinating. My worry would be he would be limited in possibly what he would want to give away. I mean, let's get this right. Him and McClair are close. They still talk. They still, they're still in each other's company. But Brian's still is terrified of him. He still says, "Oh God, I can't." I've always said on the show, if you ever say to Brian, "I'll meet you," I don't know if you remember this when we worked together, but if Brian said he was coming into the office at 12 o'clock, he'd be there about 11:30, sometimes 10 o'clock, because he was like, I was always told it could never be late. If I was late, I was going to get rollicking and all this kind of thing. So So I think Ferguson would be great on paper. But how it would work, I'm not sure, because I think Brian would be it would be like interviewing an ex, I don't know, father-in-law or an ex-teacher or something. I think he might be a little bit cagey. So, but in terms of kudos, I think Fergie would be great.
Absolutely.
Number 2, I've gone for Noel Gallagher, and there's a reason for this.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen, but one of the big stories that made the papers when we made the papers recently was that Noel and Liam Gallagher used to wash Brian McClair's car when they were kids.
Oh wow, yeah.
They worked for a car washing company in Manchester, and the guy had the contract for City and United's training ground, so the players would go and wash cars, and Brian sort of got friendly with them, and they'd go around his house and say, "Oh, I'll wash it at the weekend," or whatever. And Brian was well into his music, obviously still is. And Noel and Liam were sort of budding musicians, and would wash Brian's car, and he would give them penguin biscuits and chat to them. And they said, "Oh, we're in this band. We've got this cassette," and they gave him the first ever demo cassette of Oasis's first album.
Oh my God, that's amazing!
which he still has somewhere. He won't say where. Yeah, probably under the floorboard somewhere. But, so I just thought, and I think Noel's great value. I think he's one of those people that I've heard him on various things, and he speaks his mind. He's entertaining. He's good, and I think it would be good to get him reunited with Brian, maybe Brian could wash his car and return or something. We could do that. But talking of childhood heroes, and one of my big music heroes is Morrissey, and Brian was a big music fan, big fan of the Smiths. Morrissey actually used to write to Morrissey used to actually write to Brian.
Oh, yeah.
Like sort of fan mail, but he used to send him messages when he was playing for United.
Yeah,
which blew my mind because they're two like my biggest heroes, and the thought of like having those two on the show, not only like communicating with each other, but on the show would be. It would probably be a no because Morrissey doesn't tend to do this kind of things, but but I think that makes it more special. I think that would just be. I think if I got Morrissey on Live with Brian, I think that would be it. I think we'd never do another one again. But any of those in that order, really. And I know you sort of stipulated that it's got to be rare or legendary. I mean, Ferguson is legendary, of course he is.
Yes.
I'm just thinking of what would make a good show. I can just imagine Brian being quite cagey because he wouldn't want to. Quite often Brian will poke and ask questions and what have you. But I think with Fergie, he might be a little bit reserved. But who knows? You never know. He might come on one day. But we actually contacted Noel Gallagher's PA, and she said he'd like to. Yeah, it's not a no. We can do it sometime. So that's not a no. In terms of Morrissey, I think Luke Shaw will have retired by the time he ever comes on. But I think that's my sort of top three. But like I said, saying that, I'd love Frankie Boyle or going back to what I said a few minutes ago. Anyone that's got stories to tell and is interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty special top three there. I think all three of them would be amazing to listen to. So very good choices there. We've had a question from one of our listeners, Mark Farrell.
Yes.
As I think I think you may know him because he's asked you, did Matthew ever think when he was drinking in the GW in Swindon that he would end up doing a podcast with Brian McClair?
Well, you could ask, did I ever think I'd be drinking in the GW in Swindon? No, I didn't.
Two very, very different scenarios.
No, I didn't. Hello, Mark, by the way. No, I didn't really. No, of course I didn't, because I used to. The GW bar in Swindon was run by one of my best mates, Simon Williams, who now runs a bar in Spain, and it's funny enough, sort of friends with Brian Robson. So we kind of grew up together.
You know everyone.
Worshipping. Well, we grew up together worshipping the likes of McClair and Robson, and now they're sort of like somehow become our mates. But no, of course I didn't. So I wouldn't have had any idea. It all came about. Really. It was never a big master plan. I obviously knew I liked doing what I do and writing and stuff, but it all just fell into place. But I'm trying to think the last time I was in Swindon. It was a long time ago, but I would certainly go back. And if Mark's in there or any of the other good mates that I've got that still drinking there, then I'd be more than happy to join them for a pint. But I've got very, very fond memories of my days drinking in Swindon, which I'm sure very few people have ever said on your show before.
Well, I grew up near Swindon, so that's all we have to talk about.
Of course, yeah. I'm trying to think of famous people from Swindon that we could get on the podcast. I mean, I know Diana Dawes was from Swindon, but she's unfortunately dead.
Now that would be a nightmare.
Yeah,
she's not saying anything. I think I'm not 100% certain. I'm just looking it up now, but I think that Billy Piper is from Swindon.
Of course, and oh god, 90s kind of ladette not supermodel. What was she called? Melinda Messenger.
Oh yeah,
she actually used to come in the GW bar. I've been standing at that bar, the bottom bar, as Mark will know, and Melinda Messenger was standing there. I didn't speak to her; I was too nervous at the time. David Howell, the golfer, he used to frequent that bar as well. So we could have a proper 90s 90s get together, couldn't we? Remembering the year United did the double and get whoever was number one in the charts that year. Oh, I think it was Billy Piper. What a surprise.
There you go. There's potential there. And if anyone says, why are you doing this podcast? Just say, because we want to.
Yes. Thank you.
So sorry about that. It's a terrible joke. Mark's just replied saying it's all changed. He's moved to Glasgow.
I remember him telling me, yes, because I was up watching Clyde a few years back, and I actually met up with Brian that weekend actually. And I remember Mark now texting me saying that Clyde were one of his, I might be wrong on this, but one of his local teams. So he probably hasn't been back to the GW bar since I have, or it's probably been a long time. So Mark, if whenever you're back there, let me know, and I'll make the effort. We'll have a reunion, and we'll see if Billy Piper and Melinda Messenger are free.
They've probably been in there the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Matthew. It's been really, really interesting to talk to you and find out more about the podcast. I just want to give you a chance now just to tell our listeners where they can listen to the podcasts and where they can hear. Is it Nick Robinson is the latest guest, right?
Yeah, you can tell you've done your homework.
Yeah. You told me.
We're all top podcast providers, not just one or two, all of them. There's no excuse. What I will say is when we did appear in the national press a couple of weeks ago, a couple of them made the mistake of calling the podcast Life of Brian. It's not. It's like there's two reasons. There's two reasons we called it Life with Brian. One, because we thought we'd get sued by Michael Palin and then any other people that are still alive from Monty Python. And also, I stole it from the name of a great album by a band called Flowered Up that came out in about 1992 called Life with Brian. And I also think it fits better because
it's a very nice.
It is a Life with Brian. It's not of. It's nothing to do with his life. So it kind of is, and that is on all podcasts. We've also got our own YouTube channel. So if you search Life with Brian podcast on YouTube, you'll see us talking to all these big famous guests and a few outtakes and what have you. On Twitter, at Brian McClair Pod. On Instagram, at Brian McClair Pod. And or just pick up a tabloid paper in your local news agents and you'll probably see Brian's bearded face staring back at you.
If you're ever in Bolivia,
we're trying. We should. We should blag it, really, shouldn't we? I mean,
you've got to seize the day.
I mean, we did a great live show in Drogheda in Ireland last year, which was great. But we could really try and get one in. I'm trying to think where we are. Bogota, is it? I'm thinking of where these places are that we could be going.
Yeah,
we could do Bermuda, Bogota, Costa Rica. We were number 3 in South Korea once, which I thought was great because there's obviously a lot of competition and there's a big population there. So what a world tour it could be. We could get.
I know, that would be incredible. Just like Brian around the world.
Well, we could get Noel Gallagher to open up for us, couldn't we? And say, look,
the support act.
Yeah. Well, that's this is payback for washing his car all those years.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Matthew. It was really awesome to talk to you, and just even for the people listening, it was great to speak to you again. I know we haven't spoken to you for a while, and it was every bit as fun as I remember.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it. Let's not leave it so long next time, and let's hope there's not another global pandemic comes in between us.
Crossed.
And we'll meet in the GW bar in Swindon for a pint.
Definitely, it's a date. All right. Well, cheers for that again, Matthew. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll get this uploaded to YouTube as well and Spotify and the usual places if you couldn't hear the whole thing. But thank you from me and thank you from Matthew. Goodbye. Well, and thank you from Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cheers. And see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.